everyone! Today's another story about dumpster diving finds, so stay tuned, we're getting started. Elias Garner knew the state could take his garage before summer was over. The letter from the tax office sat on his kitchen table like a weight. 18,000 due, or they'd start the process to seize the only thing he still owned outright, his old workshop behind the house. Elias was 68, a former school custodian in a small North Carolina town, and he'd already watched his retirement get chewed up by a safe plan that turned out to be a trap. Now his back was so bad he moved like every step had a price, and he made side money the only way he could, finding thrown out appliances, fixing what still worked, and selling them cheap just to keep the lights on and his pain pills filled. The day everything changed, he wasn't hunting for treasure. He was driving home with a rusty microwave in the truck bed, thinking about roof leaks and the late fees, when he saw a curb pile outside a gated estate at the edge of town. The house belonged to a woman everyone called the widow on the hill, the kind of rich that stayed quiet and the kind of lonely that leaves nobody to argue when the cleaning crew rushes through after the funeral. There were boxes, broken lamps, and a few heavy frames tossed like they were nothing. Elias pulled over because one frame caught his eye. Thick wood, old joints, the kind you don't see anymore. He didn't want the painting, he wanted the frame for a mirror he could sell. Up close, the canvases looked like a muddy mess from the 50s, half smeared, spotted with rain and gritty like it had been dragged across the driveway. Elias almost left it right there, then he ran a hand along the carved edge of the frame and felt the solid weight. Real craftsmanship. He slid the painting into the back of his truck and drove fast, not because he felt guilty, but because he didn't want anyone to change their mind and decide trash was suddenly valuable once it was in his hands. In his garage, he set the painting on a workbench and stared at it for a long time before touching anything. The canvases felt fragile, like one wrong breath could turn the surface to dust. He didn't scrub, he didn't clean, he just loosened the back panel carefully inch by inch, the way he used to open stock locker doors at school so he wouldn't splinter the wood. When the board finally came free, something fell against the frame with a soft papery tap, and Elias' stomach tightened as if he already knew it wasn't going to be a receipt. Tucked inside was an old gallery label, yellowed and official looking, and beneath it, it's a signature Elias had seen in library art books years ago, because he used to sit in the school media center during summer vax jobs, flipping pages to rest his back. The name hit him like cold water. Rufino Tamayo. Elias leaned closer until his nose was inches from the paint, afraid to touch the surface, afraid to blink wrong. He wasn't looking at the curb junk, he was looking at a piece of art people whispered about, the kind that goes missing for decades and ruins lives when it's resurfaces. And standing alone in the garage with the text letter still waiting inside the house, Elias realized the real problem wasn't the painting's value. The real problem was this: if it truly was what the label said, somebody out there had been missing it for 30 years and he had just pulled it off the curb like a broken lamp. Elias didn't tell anyone at first. He carried the painting inside like it was a sleeping animal, then slid it behind an old sheet of plywood in the garage, the spot where he used to hide Christmas gifts when his kids were little, the night he barely ate. He kept thinking about the tax letter on his table and how ridiculous it was that a man could lose his whole life over 18,000, while $1 million secret sat 10 feet away, leaning against lawn tools and a dusty air compressor. The next morning, he went to the library not because he wanted attention, but because he didn't trust the internet. He found one of those big art books with glossy pages and careful captions, and his hands actually shook turning them. The signature matched. The style matched, even the old gallery label had the same name he saw printed in black ink under a museum photo. Elias closed the book and stared at the cover, feeling sick and hopeful at the same time. If he was wrong, he'd look like a fool. If he was right, he didn't just find art, he found trouble. He made his first mistake right there. He asked the librarian, a kind older woman, if she'd ever heard of paintings being lost and later found. She didn't pry, but she did what small towns always do. She mentioned it later to someone she trusted, like a harmless story. By the time Elias drove home, a man in a clean bottom-down was already walking the edge of his street, pausing by mailboxes like he was looking for an address. Elias told himself it was coincidence, but his back tightened the way it did when he knew a bill was coming. 2 days later, a folded paper appeared under his windshield wiper, wide, stiff, and official looking, the kind of thing that makes your stomach drop before you even read it. Across the top, in bold, it said, "Notice of intent to file claim." It didn't mention a name like Tamayo, it didn't need to. It said an intern removed from Curbside estate cleanout had been discarded in error, and demanded it be returned immediately to the estate liquidator. At the bottom was a phone number and a signature that looked practiced, like someone who wrote threats for a living. Elias walked inside holding the paper like it might stain him. A half-hour later, his mailman, Daryl, a guy Elias had known for years, stopped at the fence instead of driving on. "Elias," he said quietly, eyes flicking on the garage, "some fella in nice SUV asked me if you still fix appliances. He took a picture of your truck. Just watch yourself, alright?" Daryl didn't sound dramatic. He sounded uncomfortable, like he hated being the one to say it. That evening, the liquidator finally showed up. Not a gangster, not a movie villain, just a neat man with polished boots and a calm voice, and another guy behind him carrying a clipboard like muscle that didn't have to lift a finger. The liquidator smiled like this was business, because to him it was. "Mr. Garner," he said, "we're cleaning up a sensitive estate. People throw things out without realizing what they're tossing. Let's keep this easy. Hand over what you took from the curb and we'll call it done." Elias didn't invite him in, he didn't argue, he just stood in his doorway, feeling the text letter burning a hole in his kitchen behind him, feeling the painting's weight in the garage like a second heartbeat. Because the liquidator wasn't asking like someone who wanted a broken lamp back, he was asking like someone who knew exactly what Elias had and was battling an old man would get scared and give it up. And when the liquidator's eye slid past Elias toward the garage door, just for half a second, Elias understood. He wasn't deciding whether to keep a painting anymore. He was deciding whether to let the richest people in town take his one miracle or fight dirty enough to keep it. Elias didn't sleep. He sat at the kitchen table with that intent to file claim letter pinned under his coffee mug like it could crawl away, and he kept hearing the liquidator's voice in his head. Polite, calm, sure of himself. In a small North Carolina town, that kind of calm wasn't kindness, it was a warning. It meant he'd already started telling a story about Elias, and sooner or later the town would decide which version it believed. At sunrise, Elias did what he'd done his whole life when something felt wrong. He stopped talking and started fixing. He handled the painting like it was made of dry leaves, barely touching the surface, barely breathing near it. Then he built a hiding place the way an old custodian hides master keys. Inside plain sight, he slid the real canvas into a protective sleeve and tucked it behind a false back panel in his workbench cabinet, then put a beat-up thrift store painting into the heavy frame. Same weight, same dust, same ugly old junk. Look from the doorway. If someone came looking, they'd grab the frame and feel like a winner. He didn't call a lawyer, he didn't call the sheriff. He drove to the high school and asked for the art teacher, the one person in town who cared about art more than gossip. When she saw the gallery label photo, her face drained. She didn't say million, she just said, "This is real trouble," and wrote down a name, a retired insurance investigator who still handled recoveries quietly. "He won't make it a show," she promised. "He'll keep it clean." That afternoon, the liquidator came back, more confident now, with the clipboard guy and that same polite pressure. Elias met them at the garage door and didn't argue. He carried out the frame painting with a tired shrug and said, "Take it, I only wanted the frame." The liquidator's eye flashed just for a second before he matched it. He signed a receipt fast, the kind that made him feel protected, and walked off with the wrong canvas like it finally put Elias in his place. Elias waited until the street went quiet again, then drove the real piece to a plain office building behind a courthouse. No drama, no crowd, just a gray-haired man who examined it like it was a newborn. A few tense days later, the answer came back. It was the real thing, and the insurer wanted it back badly enough to pay a serious recovery fee. Real money, not charity, not a pat on the head. When the check cleared, Elias didn't try to reinvent his whole life. He did the thing that had been haunting him for years. He walked into the tax office and paid every dollar. No payment plan, no begging, and watched the clerk stamp the balance to zero. Then he went straight to the only place that ever felt like his, the garage. He fixed the roof, replaced the warp door track, put it in bright professional lighting over his bench, the kind that makes your hands steady and your work look honest. The garage stopped feeling like a thing he might lose and started feeling like a future again. He also did one more thing quietly. He mailed an anonymous donation to the school art program, enough for supplies, frames, a new set of brushes, because one teacher had treated him like a human being instead of a headline. No nay, no, just help, the way help should feel. A month later, the liquidator's smile vanished. People stopped returning his calls. In a small town, you don't need a courtroom to lose power, you just need the community to realize you are not as smart as you act. Elias didn't celebrate that. He just kept working under his new lights, back straight, hand steady, knowing the best revenge wasn't ruin, it was peace. So this is the story. Feels right or maybe wrong in some way, so please share it in the comments. What do you think about it? And if you like the video, please give me this thumbs up and subscribe.